Sometimes, the bond between a man and his dog reveals truths that were meant to stay buried forever. Silas Hart, a weathered drifter moving through the unforgiving Black Hills, never questioned his German shepherd's loyalty until Dutch refused to leave the base of Silver Vale Falls for 3 straight days. When Silas finally followed his companion through the thundering waterfall's curtain, he discovered a hidden cave filled with military crates from the Civil War's final days. Inside wasn't gold or weapons, but something far more dangerous: documents proving the territory's governor built his empire on betrayal and stolen blood money. What secret was worth hiding behind a waterfall for 15 years? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 weeks before Dutch led him to that cave, Silas Hart rode into Redemption Gulch with nothing but a bedroll, a worn saddlebag, and a dog who knew him better than most people ever had. The town sat in a valley where the prairie met the foothills, the kind of place that had survived the war years and the hard times after by sheer stubbornness. Wooden buildings lined a main street that turned to mud when it rained and dust when it didn't. Silas had seen 100 towns like it across the territories, each one trying to write its own story of survival and hope. He was 53 years old, though some days he felt older and some days younger, depending on which memories decided to visit. His face carried the lines of a man who'd spent more time outdoors than in, with crow's feet from squinting against sun and wind, and a beard that had gone more grey than brown. He wore his hat low and his gun belt comfortable, neither trying to intimidate nor inviting challenge. Just a man passing through, same as he'd been passing through for the better part of 15 years. Dutch padded alongside his horse, tongue lolling in the afternoon heat. The German shepherd was 5 years old, all muscle and intelligence, with a coat that shone from good care and eyes that missed nothing. Silas had found him as a pup during a blizzard up in the Montana Territory, half frozen and alone beside what was left of a settler's wagon. The mother dog was dead, the family gone to seek shelter, and never returned. Silas had tucked the pup inside his coat and kept riding, and by the time the storm cleared 2 days later, they'd become partners in a way that didn't require words or contracts. The boarding house stood on the edge of town, a 2-story structure with a porch that wrapped around 3 sides and flower boxes that someone actually tended. A hand-painted sign read, "Brennan's Lodging, clean rooms, fair rates." Silas dismounted and tied his horse to the rail, Dutch immediately sitting at attention beside him. The woman who answered his knock was somewhere in her 60s, with silver hair, pulled back in a practical bun, and eyes that assessed him with the kind of directness that came from raising children and burying a husband. She wore a simple dress with an apron, and her hands showed the work of someone who didn't hire help for what she could do herself. "Help you?" she asked. "Looking for a room, ma'am. Week to start, maybe longer depending on work." She studied him for a long moment, then looked down at Dutch. "Dog stays outside. Dog's cleaner than most men and better behaved than all of them. He stays with me, or we find other accommodations." Her expression didn't change, but something softened around her eyes. 10 cents extra for the dog, meals included, breakfast and supper. "You cause trouble, you're out. I'm Emma Brennan, and this is my house." Silas Hart. "And we won't cause trouble, Mrs. Brennan. It's just Emma. Lost my husband 7 years back. No point holding on to titles." She stepped aside to let him in. "Rooms upstairs, second door on the right. Supper's at 6, and I expect people at my table to have washed and to mind their manners." The room was small but clean, with a bed that didn't sag, a washstand with a mirror, and a window that looked out over the street. Silas set his saddlebag on the chair and removed his hat, running a hand through hair that needed cutting. Dutch immediately claimed the braided rug beside the bed, circling twice before settling with a contented sigh. "This'll do fine," Silas said to the empty room, and meant it. That evening at supper, he met the other residents and learned the rhythms of the house. There were two other boarders, a surveyor named Phillips, who was mapping territorial boundaries, and a widow named Sarah, who taught at the small schoolhouse. But the person who drew Silas's attention was the boy who helped Emma serve the meal. Timothy Brennan was 12 years old, all elbows and ears, with his grandmother's direct gaze and a hunger for stories that went beyond food. He peppered Silas with questions about where he'd traveled and what he'd seen, until Emma finally told him to hush and let people eat in peace. "Boy means no harm," Silas said quietly. "Curious mind's a good thing. His mother died in childbirth, father ran off before he was born. I've raised him since he was 3 days old." Emma's voice carried no self-pity, just facts stated plain. "Tries to fill his head with stories because we don't have money for books." After the meal, Silas found Timothy on the back porch, whittling a piece of pine with more enthusiasm than skill. Dutch had followed the boy out, recognizing a friend. "Your grandmother says you like stories," Silas said, settling onto the steps. "Yes, sir. You been a lot of places?" "Some. More than I needed to, maybe." "Were you in the war?" Silas was quiet for a moment, watching the last light fade from the western sky. "I was. Union scout mostly. Tracked movements, found water, kept men from getting lost." "Did you fight?" "Sometimes. Mostly, I tried to keep people alive by knowing which way to go." He pulled out his leather journal, worn soft from years of handling. "Kept notes on everything. Water sources, safe trails, people I met. Man who tracks needs to remember details." Timothy's eyes widened at the journal. "You wrote all that?" "Every page. Your grandmother mentioned you can't afford books. You know how to read?" "Yes, sir. Teacher Sarah's been helping me. Reading's important, but so is knowing how to observe, how to see what others miss." Silas handed him the journal. "Take a look. See if you can figure out what the marks and notations mean." The boy handled it like treasure, carefully turning pages filled with sketches of terrain, notes about weather patterns, observations about tracks and signs. His finger traced lines of careful handwriting, struggling with some words, but clearly engaged. Emma appeared in the doorway. "Timothy, dishes need washing." "Yes, ma'am." The boy reluctantly handed back the journal. "Thank you, Mr. Hart." After he'd gone inside, Emma sat down beside Silas. "That was kind of you. Boy's got a good mind. Be a shame to waste it. Not many men would notice a child's hunger for learning, had a father who thought education mattered more than most things. Even during hard times, he made sure I could read and figure." Silas closed the journal and slipped it back into his pocket. "Mrs. Brennan, Emma. I'm looking for work. Tracking mostly, but I can do other things. Town have need of that kind of skill?" "Might. Rancher named Hartley's been losing horses to thieves. Sheriffs had no luck finding them. You could talk to him tomorrow." She paused. "Town's also preparing for a visit from the governor, Thornton Caldwell. Making a tour of the territories, giving speeches about law and order." Something in her tone made Silas look at her more carefully. "You don't sound impressed." "I'm impressed by what a man does, not what he says he'll do. Caldwell talks a fine game about justice and prosperity, but talks cheap when you're already rich." She stood, brushing dust from her skirt. "My husband Jacob served under Caldwell during the war. Came home different, troubled by something he never would explain. Died, still carrying whatever bothered him. War troubles most men who were there. This was different. Jacob kept saying he should have spoken up, that he'd been a coward. I never understood what he meant." Emma's voice softened. "Governor or not, I don't trust the man. But that's just one widow's opinion, and opinions don't change facts." Over the next few days, Silas established his routine in Redemption Gulch. He talked to Rancher Hartley and agreed to track the stolen horses for a fair fee. He walked the town's streets and noted its rhythms, the way he always did in new places. Dutch became a familiar sight, well-behaved and friendly, winning over even skeptics with his calm demeanor. And he watched as the town transformed itself for Governor Caldwell's visit. Banners went up across the main street, buildings received fresh paint, the saloon even put out its better chairs and cleaned its windows. Sheriff Cole Masterson, a man in his 50s with a badge that had real weight to it, personally supervised the preparations. Masterson was fair and honest by all accounts, the kind of lawman who'd rather prevent trouble than punish it after the fact. Silas observed all this from the edges, the way he preferred. He noticed things others missed, the way certain men watched strangers with more than casual interest, the expensive horses tied outside the hotel that didn't match the worn appearance of their riders. Signs of money moving through town in ways that didn't quite fit its normal economy. And he noticed the campaign posters with Thornton Caldwell's face, promising integrity and justice. Something about those posters bothered Dutch. The dog would growl softly whenever they passed one, hackles rising slightly before Silas calmed him with a touch. "What is it, boy?" Silas asked quietly one evening as they walked past another poster. "You smell something I don't?" Dutch just pressed closer to Silas's leg, protective and troubled. The tracking job took Silas into the foothills 3 days after he arrived. The horse thieves had been clever, but not clever enough for someone who'd spent decades reading sign. He found their camp in a box canyon, recovered 8 of Hartley's horses, and reported the thieves' location to Sheriff Masterson. The law handled the arrests, and Silas collected his fee without seeking credit or attention. "You're good at what you do," Masterson said as he paid him. "If you're thinking of staying around, I could use a man with your skills, not as a deputy, but consultation work. Territory's got plenty of people who need tracking done right." "I'll consider it," Silas said, which was more commitment than he usually gave. That evening, the governor arrived. Silas stood in the crowd as Thornton Caldwell stepped down from a fine carriage with his entourage. The man was in his late 50s, tall and distinguished, with silver hair and the kind of presence that commanded attention. He wore expensive clothes tailored to suggest authority without ostentation, and his smile reached the crowd like sunshine. "My friends," Caldwell began, his voice carrying across the square, "it is an honor to stand before you in this fine community. You represent the backbone of our territory, honest people building honest lives through honest work." The crowd responded warmly. Silas watched faces light up with hope and pride. "Some say our territory isn't ready for statehood," Caldwell continued. "They say we're too rough, too new, too untamed. But I look at towns like Redemption Gulch, and I see civilization flourishing in soil watered by sacrifice and determination. I see families raising children with values that built this nation. I see law-abiding citizens who deserve representation equal to any in Washington." More applause. Silas noticed Timothy near the front, eyes shining with admiration. "My platform is simple," Caldwell said. "Law, order, and opportunity. No tolerance for lawlessness, no corruption in government. Every man and woman in this territory deserves to live without fear, to prosper through honest effort, to leave their children a better world than they inherited." Noble words, Silas thought. The kind of words politicians always spoke, but Emma's comment lingered in his mind. "Talk's cheap when you're already rich." After the speech, Caldwell worked the crowd, shaking hands and listening to concerns with apparent, genuine interest. When he reached Timothy, he placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and spoke quietly. Timothy's face glowed. That night at supper, Timothy couldn't stop talking about the governor. "He asked my name," the boy said. "Said young men like me are the territory's future. Said education and integrity matter more than wealth." "What did you think of him?" Silas asked. "He's everything a leader should be, brave and wise and honest." Silas caught Emma's eye across the table. She was watching her grandson with a mixture of affection and concern. Later, after Timothy had gone to bed, Silas sat on the front porch with his journal, making notes by lamplight. Dutch lay at his feet, and Emma brought out coffee in cups that had seen better days but were clean and served with care. "Boys smitten with Caldwell," Silas observed. "Children need heroes," Emma said. "I just wish he'd chosen a better one." "You really think Caldwell's not what he seems?" "I think Jacob died believing something terrible about that man. And Jacob wasn't given to flights of fancy or paranoia. He was the most sensible person I ever knew." She sipped her coffee. "When you've lived as long as I have, You learn to trust your instincts about people. And my instincts say Thornton Caldwell is a very good liar. Silas wrote that in his journal, along with observations about the town, the governor's visit, and Dutch's strange reaction to the campaign posters. Details mattered. Details were how you saw the truth beneath surfaces. He didn't know yet that those details would become evidence, that his careful observations would help unravel a conspiracy 15 years in the making, that the tracking job he'd just completed was leading him toward the Black Hills and a discovery that would change everything. All he knew was that something felt wrong, the way it sometimes did before trouble arrived. A tension in the air, a sense of pieces moving into position, and he knew that Dutch felt it too. The dog was restless that night, rising several times to pace the room before settling again. "Easy, boy," Silas whispered. "Whatever it is, we'll face it when it comes." The next morning, Rancher Hartley stopped by with another job. Possible horse thieves operating near Silver Vale Falls in the Dome. Black Hills. Would Silas take a look? Silas agreed, packed his gear, and prepared to leave at dawn. Emma made him extra provisions, and Timothy helped ready his horse. "Will you come back?" the boy asked. "Plan to. Got a room here, don't I? Grandma says you're a drifter. That drifters never stay." Silas looked at the boy's earnest face and realized something had changed. For the first time in 15 years, the thought of settling down didn't feel like surrender. It felt like possibility. "Maybe this drifter's getting tired of moving," he said quietly. "Maybe I've found a place worth staying for." Timothy's smile was reward enough for that small admission. At dawn, Silas and Dutch headed into the Black Hills. The job seemed routine. Track some thieves, maybe recover some horses, collect another fee. Simple work for a man with his skills. He had no idea that 3 days from now, Dutch would refuse to leave the base of a waterfall. That following his dog's instinct would lead to a cave full of secrets. That the simple tracking job would become something far more dangerous and important than he'd ever imagined. But as they rode toward the mountains, something made him check his saddlebag to confirm his journal was secure. Some instinct told him that whatever he was riding toward, he'd want to document it carefully. Details mattered, and soon, those details would matter more than he'd ever dreamed. The Black Hills rose from the prairie like ancient sentinels, their slopes thick with pine, and their peaks still holding patches of snow even in summer. Silas had tracked through worse terrain, but something about this country felt different. Older, somehow, like it remembered things that happened before maps gave them names. The first day went as expected. He found the thieves' trail easily enough, 3 horses, probably stolen, being moved north through terrain that would hide them from casual observation. The tracks told him the riders were competent but not expert, confident enough to take chances but not skilled enough to cover their trail properly. Dutch worked ahead, nose to ground, occasionally looking back to confirm Silas was following. The dog had always been good at this work, understanding without being taught that tracking was partnership between man and animal. Trust flowing both directions. By late afternoon they'd reached Silver Vale Falls. Silas heard it before he saw it, a thunder of water that echoed through the canyon. When they emerged from the tree line, the sight was impressive enough to make him pause. The falls dropped maybe 60 feet from a granite lip, crashing into a pool that churned white before flowing downstream as a proper creek. Spray caught the sunlight and made rainbows that shifted as clouds moved overhead. The thieves' trail continued north, skirting the falls and heading into higher country. Silas made camp near the pool that evening. Dutch curled beside the fire after a meal of jerky and hardtack. Everything was normal, until it wasn't. The second day, Dutch started acting strange. They'd broken camp and were preparing to follow the trail when the dog suddenly abandoned the track and trotted to the base of the falls. He stood there, staring at the cascade of water, hackles raised and body tense. "Dutch," Silas called. "Come on, boy. Trail's this way." The dog ignored him. That alone was unusual. Dutch was disciplined, responsive, always attuned to Silas's commands. But now he just stood there, staring at the water like it held secrets only he could sense. Silas walked over and checked for wildlife signs. Sometimes a bear or mountain lion could distract even a well-trained dog. But there was nothing. Just water and rock, and that curious intensity in Dutch's posture. "Nothing there, partner," Silas said, scratching behind the dog's ears. "Let's get back to work." Dutch followed reluctantly, looking back at the falls every few steps. But he did follow, and they picked up the trail again. By evening they'd found where the thieves had split up, the stolen horses being driven in different directions to complicate pursuit. Silas marked the location in his journal and decided to return the next day with a clear head. But Dutch barely touched his food that night. He kept rising and pacing, returning to stare in the direction of the falls, though they were now camped a mile away. "What's gotten into you?" Silas asked, checking the dog for injury or illness. But Dutch was physically fine, just troubled by something Silas couldn't see or understand. The third day changed everything. Silas woke to find Dutch gone. A moment of panic before he spotted the dog standing at the camp's edge, looking back toward the falls. When Silas stood, Dutch immediately started walking in that direction. "Dutch," Silas called, his voice carrying the command tone that usually meant obedience. "Here, boy." The dog stopped, looked back, but didn't return. Instead, he whined a sound of pleading Silas had never heard from him before. Something was wrong. Dogs didn't behave this way without reason, especially dogs like Dutch, who'd proven reliable through 5 years of partnership. Silas made a decision. Forget the thieves for now. Figure out what was bothering his companion. They returned to Silver Vale Falls. The moment they arrived, Dutch walked straight to the pool at the base and waded in. The water was cold, mountain-fed and swift. Any sensible dog would avoid it. Dutch swam toward the falls. "Dutch!" Silas shouted. "Get back here!" But the dog kept going, paddling through the churning water until he reached the curtain of falling water itself. Then he disappeared behind it. Silas's heart hammered. The dog would be crushed by the force of the falls, or swept away, or Dutch reappeared, swimming back to shore. He climbed out, shook himself, and then did something that froze Silas in place. The dog looked directly at him and barked. Once. Sharp, a sound that clearly meant, "Follow me." Then Dutch went back into the water and swam to the falls again. Silas stood there, boots in hand, weighing sense against instinct. Dutch had never led him wrong, not once in 5 years. But this was madness. Swimming through a waterfall because a dog wanted him to? Dutch barked again from behind the curtain of water. The sound barely audible over the fall's thunder, but unmistakable in its urgency. "I'm going to regret this," Silas muttered. He secured his hat, made sure his weapons were protected, and waded into the pool. The water was shockingly cold. His breath caught as it reached his chest. The current pulled at him, trying to sweep him downstream. He fought toward the falls, every instinct screaming that this was suicide. The falling water hit him like a physical blow, deafening, blinding. For a terrible moment he thought he'd misjudged, that the force would drive him under. But then he was through it, gasping and streaming water, standing in sudden stillness. Behind the falls was a cave. Dutch stood there, tail wagging now, pleased that Silas had finally understood. The entrance was maybe 8 feet wide, completely hidden by the curtain of water. You could stand 10 feet from the falls and never know it existed. Silas pulled out his flint and steel, lit the small lantern he'd managed to keep dry in an oilskin pouch. The light pushed back darkness and revealed a cavern that extended back into the rock farther than the lantern's glow could reach. And stacked along the walls were crates. Military crates, stamped with dates and markings Silas recognized from his war years. He moved closer, water still dripping from his clothes. The nearest crate was marked CSA 1865, April, Confederate States of America, the final month of the war. His hands shook slightly as he pried open the crate. He expected weapons, or gold, or supplies. The kinds of things desperate armies hid for later use. Inside were papers, uniform manifests, requisition forms, correspondence, all organized with military precision. The second crate held more papers and something else, a map, yellowed with age but carefully preserved, showing terrain Silas recognized. The borderlands between Union and Confederate territory during the war's final weeks. Routes were marked in red ink, with dates and troop numbers, annotated in neat handwriting. Silas spread the map on top of a crate and studied it by lantern light. His military training kicked in, and he recognized what he was seeing. A planned ambush. Multiple Confederate units positioned to intercept a Union column moving along a specific route, but there was something wrong with the annotations. They included information that should have been Union secret. Troop strength, movement schedules, the location of a payroll transport, details that should have been known only to Union command. The third crate contained ledgers, financial records showing receipts for money, large sums being divided among multiple parties, and correspondence, letters signed with initials T, C. Silas read one letter, then another, his horror growing with each line. These weren't Confederate military orders. They were evidence of betrayal. Someone had sold Union troop information to the Confederates. Someone had arranged for a Union payroll to be ambushed and stolen, then split the proceeds. Someone had orchestrated the deaths of 47 Union soldiers for personal profit. And that someone was Captain Thornton Caldwell. The evidence was overwhelming. Letters in Caldwell's handwriting discussing details of the operation. Financial ledgers showing his share of the stolen payroll. Notations about how to disappear the evidence, how to use post-war chaos to establish a new identity as a Union hero rather than a traitor. Silas sat down heavily on a crate, his mind racing. The governor of the territory, the man who stood in town squares and spoke of honor and integrity, the man Timothy idolized. He'd built his entire empire on blood money stolen from his own side during war. 47 men died in that ambush. Silas checked the casualty list included in the papers. Names, ranks, ages. Farm boys and city clerks and fathers and sons, all killed because their captain had sold them to the enemy for silver. How many of those men had Emma's husband known, had served beside? Silas stood and examined the cave more carefully. Fresh boot prints in the dust near the entrance. Someone had been here recently. Checking on the evidence? Making sure it remained hidden? Of course. Caldwell would need to protect this secret. Couldn't destroy the evidence, entirely too risky if others knew about it, if it was insurance against co-conspirators, but couldn't leave it unsecured either. So he visited periodically, made sure everything remained concealed behind the waterfall. Silas's tracking instincts kicked in. He estimated the boot prints were maybe 2 weeks old, about when Caldwell began his territorial tour. The governor was making rounds, and one of those rounds included checking on buried secrets. Dutch whined softly. The dog had done his job, led Silas to what needed finding. Now he was ready to leave this damp cave and return to sunshine. "Good boy," Silas whispered. "You found something important, something that changes everything." He couldn't take all the evidence, too much of it too bulky, and crossing back through the waterfall with armloads of documents was impossible, but he could take the most crucial pieces: the map, key letters, pages from the financial ledger, enough to prove the basic facts. He selected documents carefully, wrapping them in oilskin to protect them from water damage. His journal went into the packet too. He'd need to document everything he'd seen, create a record that couldn't be easily dismissed. Before leaving, he studied the cave layout one more time, memorizing details. If Caldwell destroyed this evidence, Silas's testimony about its existence would need to be detailed and convincing. The swim back through the falls was harder, carrying the protected packet of documents, but Silas managed it. He emerged into afternoon sunlight, Dutch padding beside him, both of them soaked and exhausted. On the shore, Silas stripped off his wet shirt and wrung it out, his mind already working through implications. This wasn't just a tracking job anymore. This was evidence of treason, of murder, of a conspiracy that had succeeded for 15 years and was now positioned to expand its power through politics. Caldwell couldn't be allowed to become governor. More than that, he couldn't be allowed to escape justice for what he'd done to those 47 men. But who could Silas trust with this information? The local sheriff was loyal to Caldwell. Territorial authorities might be compromised. Even federal authorities could be difficult to reach with credible evidence from a drifter nobody knew. He needed more. Witnesses, corroboration, a path to legitimate authority that couldn't be blocked by Caldwell's influence. Silas packed his gear methodically, his training keeping him focused despite the magnitude of what he'd discovered. Dutch shook himself dry and waited patiently, sensing his human's troubled state. "We're heading back to town," Silas told the dog. "Got to figure out our next move. Got to be smart about this, because Caldwell's dangerous and connected." He paused, looking back at the falls. Somewhere behind that curtain of water was evidence that could destroy a powerful man, evidence that proved heroes could be villains, evidence that truth, however deeply buried, could still be found. "If you were willing to follow an insistent dog through a waterfall," Silas smiled grimly and touched Dutch's head. "Let's go find justice for those 47 men. And for everyone else Caldwell's betrayed since." They rode toward Redemption Gulch as the sun set behind them, shadows lengthening across the Black Hills. Silas carried documents that would change everything if he lived long enough to use them. Silas rode into Redemption Gulch 2 days later, the oilskin packet of documents hidden in his saddlebag beneath dirty clothes and camp gear. He'd spent those 2 days thinking through every angle, every risk, every possible path forward. The more he considered it, the more complicated it became. Trust was the central problem. Who could receive this evidence without it disappearing into Caldwell's network of influence? The local sheriff was honest but loyal. Territorial judges might be compromised. Even military authorities could be difficult to reach with credible evidence from a man with no official standing. Emma was on the porch when he arrived, mending a shirt in the late afternoon light. Her face showed relief when she saw him. "Wondered if you'd come back," she said. "Timothy's been watching the road for 2 days. Told him I would." Silas dismounted, noting how his legs protested the long ride. Getting too old for this much time in the saddle. "Governor still in town?" "Just until tomorrow. Giving another speech tonight, then moving on to the next stop on his tour." Emma set down her mending. "You look troubled. Just tired from the trail." But Emma's eyes were too sharp to fool. "Silas Hart, I've lived long enough to know the difference between trail-tired and soul-tired. What happened out there?" He glanced around to make sure they were alone. "Best we talk about it later, after I've had time to think some more." That evening, Governor Caldwell held court in the town square. A platform had been erected, and lanterns hung from poles to light the gathering dusk. The entire town seemed to have turned out, drawn by the promise of seeing power and prestige up close. Silas stood at the back of the crowd with Dutch beside him. From this position, he could observe without being obvious, could watch not just Caldwell, but the people around him, the men who traveled with him, the dynamics of how power moved through crowds. "My friends," Caldwell began, his voice rich and practiced, "I stand before you humbled by your warmth and inspired by your determination. This town represents everything our territory can become: prosperous, lawful, united in purpose." The crowd listened raptly. Silas watched Timothy near the front, the boy's face shining with admiration. "Some ask me why I chose public service," Caldwell continued. "Why a man who fought for his country in her darkest hour would then dedicate his life to territorial governance. The answer is simple. I've seen what happens when good men remain silent. I've witnessed the cost of corruption and lawlessness, and I've learned that honor demands we stand for something larger than ourselves." Applause rippled through the crowd. Silas felt sick. Every word Caldwell spoke was true in itself but false in his mouth, like scripture quoted by the devil. Dutch growled softly, hackles rising. Several people nearby glanced at the dog nervously. "Easy, boy," Silas whispered, placing a calming hand on Dutch's neck. But he understood the dog's reaction. Dutch could sense things humans rationalized away, could smell the rot beneath polished surfaces. After the speech, Caldwell worked the crowd with practiced ease. He remembered names, asked about families, listened to concerns with apparent, genuine care. A master performer, Silas realized. The kind of liar who'd convinced himself his lies were truth. When Caldwell reached Timothy, he placed both hands on the boy's shoulders. "Young man, I remember you from my last visit. Timothy Brennan, isn't it?" "Yes, sir." Timothy's voice cracked with excitement. "Your grandmother told me you're an excellent student, that you dream of making something of yourself." Caldwell reached into his vest and pulled out a silver pocket watch. "I want you to have this. It was given to me after the war, inscribed for valor. But I think it should belong to someone who represents our territory's future, not its past." He pressed the watch into Timothy's hands. The crowd murmured approval. Silas saw Emma standing nearby, her face unreadable. The watch caught lamplight as Timothy held it up with trembling hands. Silas could just make out the inscription, "For Valor, Richmond 1865. Richmond, the Confederate capital. Given in 1865, the war's final year." Silas's mind raced. Caldwell's public story was that he'd served the entire war with Union forces, been honorably discharged in early 1865 after being wounded. But this watch was from Richmond. Confederate Richmond, dated after Caldwell claimed to have left service. The timeline didn't match. Small thing, maybe meaningless to anyone who didn't know what Silas knew. But added to the documents hidden in his saddlebag, it was another thread in the web of lies. Timothy clutched the watch like holy relic. "Thank you, Governor. I'll treasure it always." "I know you will, son. And when you're older, when you've made your mark on this territory, you'll remember that someone believed in you." Caldwell looked up at Emma. "You've raised a fine young man, Mrs. Brennan. He's a credit to your family." Emma's voice was carefully neutral. "Thank you, Governor. Timothy certainly seems to admire you." Did Caldwell catch the subtle emphasis on "seems"? Silas couldn't tell, but he noticed Sheriff Masterson watching Emma with thoughtful eyes. The crowd dispersed slowly, people reluctant to let the excitement end. Silas waited until most had gone before approaching Emma and Timothy near the boarding house. The boy was still examining the watch by lamplight. "Look, Mr. Hart, the governor gave this to me. It's real silver, and it still works perfectly." Silas examined it with apparent casual interest. The inscription was clear. "For Valor, Richmond 1865. Inside the cover was engraved T.C. "That's quite a gift," Silas said carefully. "Generous of the governor." "He said it was given to him for being brave in the war," Timothy said. "Now he's giving it to me to inspire me to be brave too." "Bravery comes in many forms," Silas said, handing back the watch. "Sometimes the bravest thing is standing for truth, even when it costs you something." Timothy nodded seriously, not fully understanding but sensing wisdom in the words. Later that night, after Timothy had gone to bed, Silas sat with Emma on the front porch. The town was quiet, most lights already dark. Dutch dozed at their feet. "You found something in the Black Hills," Emma said quietly. Not a question. "Yes, something to do with the governor." "Yes." Emma was silent for a long moment. "Jacob's trouble, what he never spoke about. It was something to do with Caldwell, wasn't it?" "I believe so. Can't prove it yet, but I'm going to try." Silas pulled out his journal. "Emma, I need to ask you something. Did Jacob leave any papers, letters, maybe, or notes from the war? Some things in a trunk in the attic. I never could bear to go through them thoroughly after he died. Just packed it all away." She studied Silas's face. "You think there might be something in there that matters?" "Might be. If Jacob suspected something about Caldwell, he might have written it down. Men who keep secrets often keep records too, even if they never show them to anyone." "You can look through it tomorrow," Emma decided. "Whatever Jacob knew, whatever troubled him so badly it helped kill him, I want it brought to light. He deserved better than dying with that weight on his conscience. This could be dangerous, Emma, for you and Timothy both. Caldwell's not going to let evidence of his crimes surface without a fight. I'm 64 years old, Silas Hart. I buried my husband and raised my grandson and kept this house running through droughts and recessions and every other hardship God saw fit to send. I'm not afraid of one corrupt politician, governor or not." Her voice softened. "Besides, seems to me you could use an ally. Man can't fight powerful enemies alone. I've got Dutch. You've got a good dog. But you also need someone who knows this town's history, who Jacob trusted enough to marry, and who's stubborn enough to see justice done." She stood and opened the door. "Come on, let's look at that trunk now. If there's something there, I want to know about it tonight." The attic was cramped and dusty, lit by a single lamp Emma carried. The trunk sat in the corner under the eaves, covered by an old quilt. Emma pulled off the quilt and opened the trunk with a key she wore on a chain around her neck. Inside were the artifacts of Jacob Brennan's life, his uniform coat carefully folded, a Bible with his name inscribed inside, letters tied with ribbon, and at the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, a small packet of papers. Emma lifted out the packet with shaking hands. "I'd forgotten this was here. Jacob told me once to burn it if anything happened to him, but I couldn't bring myself to destroy anything of his." Silas carefully unwrapped the oilcloth. Inside was a letter, unsealed, addressed to Army Command but never sent. The date was 1 week after Jacob's discharge in 1865. He read it by lamplight, Emma looking over his shoulder. With each line, the truth Jacob had carried to his grave became clear. Jacob had suspected Caldwell, had seen things that didn't add up, had documented his concerns in careful, measured language that showed a man trying to balance duty against fear. And at the bottom, he'd explained why he never sent it. "I have a wife and a child coming. If I speak against Captain Caldwell, he will destroy me and them. I choose their safety over justice. God forgive me." Emma wept quietly. He knew. All those years, he knew and couldn't speak. Silas put a hand on her shoulder. He did what he thought was right to protect his family. That took its own kind of courage. "What do we do now?" "Now we finish what Jacob started," Silas said. "We expose the truth and let justice finally be served. For Jacob, for those 47 men who died, and for everyone else Caldwell's betrayed." In his room later, Silas added the new evidence to his packet of documents. Jacob's letter, the watch's suspicious inscription, observations about Caldwell's behavior. Each piece was small, but together they formed a picture. Tomorrow Caldwell would leave town, continuing his tour. But Silas knew now that somewhere in the territory were other survivors of that betrayed regiment. Men who'd lived with guilt and suspicion for 15 years. Men who might be willing to testify if they knew someone was finally listening. Dutch sighed in his sleep, paws twitching as he dreamed. Silas opened his journal to a fresh page and began to write, documenting everything, building a case that couldn't be ignored or dismissed, working toward justice, one careful word at a time. Outside, the night was peaceful, but storm clouds were gathering, even if most of the territory couldn't see them yet. Morning came with the kind of clear light that made everything seem possible. Silas woke to the smell of Emma's coffee drifting up from the kitchen and Dutch's cold nose pressing against his hand. "All right, boy. I'm awake." Over breakfast, Emma mentioned that there were more items in Jacob's trunk they hadn't examined the night before. "I was too upset to keep looking. But if you want to search more thoroughly, there might be other things." Silas returned to the attic after the meal, this time bringing better light. Timothy came with him, curious about his grandfather's belongings. "Did you know him well?" Silas asked as they climbed the narrow stairs. "Not really. I was only 3 when he died. Grandma says I have his eyes." Timothy paused. "She doesn't talk about him much. Says it hurts too much." In the trunk, beneath the uniform and letters, Silas found a wooden box containing military documents, Jacob's discharge papers, commendations, and a photograph. A daguerreotype, its surface silvered with age, but the image still clear. It showed a group of soldiers, maybe 20 men, standing in formation, They wore Union blue, and most looked young despite the hardness the war had put in their eyes. In the center stood an officer. Silas recognized immediately. A younger Thornton Caldwell, captain's bars on his shoulders. The photograph was dated March 1865, just weeks before the ambush that killed 47 men. Silas studied each face carefully. Some of these men would have died in that attack. Others might have survived to carry guilt like Jacob had. Names were written on the back in faded ink. Full regiment roster with ranks. "Is that the governor?" Timothy asked, peering at the image. "That's him. Much younger, but yes. Grandpa served under him?" "For a time." Silas copied the names into his journal, cross-referencing them with the casualty list from the cave documents. 17 of the men in this photograph had died in the ambush. 17 faces looking at the camera, unaware they had less than a month to live. "Mr. Hart, why do you look so sad?" Silas glanced at the boy. "Just thinking about how young they all were, how much life they had ahead of them." Emma appeared at the attic door. "Governor's holding a reception this afternoon. Open invitation to townspeople. Sheriff Masterson mentioned you might want to attend, Silas. Said you might find it interesting." Interesting wasn't the word Silas would have chosen, but he understood Emma's meaning. Watch Caldwell up close, see how he operated. Maybe learn something useful. "I'll go," he decided. "Timothy, want to come with me?" The boy's face lit up. "Really? I can go?" "If your grandmother allows it," Emma nodded. "Just keep close to Mr. Hart. And Timothy, remember what we talked about. Heroes aren't always what they seem." The reception was held in the town hall, a building that served as courthouse, meeting space, and occasional church, depending on need. Tables had been set up with food and drink, paid for by Caldwell's campaign funds. Territorial flags decorated the walls alongside campaign banners. Silas wore his cleanest shirt and had Dutch wait outside with instructions to stay. The dog obeyed but looked offended at being excluded. Inside, Caldwell moved through the crowd like a man born to it, shaking hands, laughing at jokes, making each person feel seen and valued. It was masterful performance, and Silas grudgingly admitted the man had genuine charisma. Sheriff Masterson intercepted Silas near the refreshment table. "Glad you came, Hart. Wanted to ask about that tracking job. You never filed a full report. Recovered the horses, you arrested the thieves. Seemed like report enough." "True, but I'm curious about those few days you spent in the Black Hills. Any interesting discoveries?" Silas met the sheriff's eyes steadily. Masterson was fishing, but for what? Did he suspect something? Or was this routine law enforcement curiosity? "Interesting country up there," Silas said carefully. "Good water, decent game, some beautiful views. Nothing worth a formal report." Masterson sipped his coffee. "Governor mentioned he'd heard about a tracker operating in that region. Asked if I knew anything about it. I told him about you. Hope that was all right." A warning, Silas realized. Masterson was letting him know Caldwell had taken notice. "No problem with that. I do track for hire, after all. Not secret work." "Course not." Masterson paused. "Just be careful, Hart. Territory can be dangerous for men who find things other people want kept hidden." Before Silas could respond, Caldwell himself approached. Up close, the governor was even more impressive. Tall, distinguished, with eyes that seemed warm and trustworthy. A man you'd want to believe in. "You must be the tracker Sheriff Masterson mentioned," Caldwell said, extending his hand. "Silas Hart, isn't it? Heard you recovered Hartley's horses with remarkable efficiency." Silas shook the offered hand. Caldwell's grip was firm but not aggressive. "Just following signs, Governor. Not complicated when you know what to look for. Modest. I like that." Caldwell smiled. "Tell me, Mr. Hart, what brings a man with your skills to Redemption Gulch? We're not exactly a hub of activity. Drifted in looking for work. Found it. Might stay a while. You served in the war, didn't you? I can always recognize a fellow veteran. Union scout. Nothing glamorous. Scouts were essential. I commanded infantry myself. Lost good men. For just a moment, Caldwell's expression showed something that might have been genuine grief. Or was brilliant acting. The war changed all of us, I think. Taught us hard lessons about loyalty, sacrifice, duty. It did that, Silas agreed quietly. An aide approached and whispered something to Caldwell. The governor nodded and turned back to Silas. Forgive me, Mr. Hart. Duty calls. But I hope you'll consider staying in Redemption Gulch. We need good men like you, building our territory's future. After Caldwell moved away, Timothy appeared at Silas's elbow. He's amazing, isn't he? So kind and thoughtful. He certainly knows how to talk to people, Silas said neutrally. They stayed another hour, Silas observing the way power moved through the room. Caldwell's aides were efficient and watchful, noting who spoke with the governor, who seemed influential, who might be useful. This was more than a political campaign. It was intelligence gathering, building networks, identifying both assets and potential threats. Silas realized with cold certainty that he was now on Caldwell's radar as a potential threat. The conversation with Masterson hadn't been subtle. Caldwell knew someone had been in the Black Hills, knew someone might have found something. The question was whether Caldwell would act on that suspicion or wait to see if actual evidence surfaced. Walking home with Timothy after the reception, Silas found himself studying the boy's profile. Young, idealistic, believing in heroes because he needed to. How would Timothy handle learning the truth about Caldwell? Would it break something in him, or teach him valuable lessons about how the world really worked? Mr. Hart, Timothy said quietly, Grandma said heroes aren't always what they seem. What did she mean? Silas considered his answer carefully. She meant that sometimes people who look heroic on the outside are hiding things, and sometimes real heroes are ordinary people doing right things without expecting credit. Like you following Dutch through that waterfall? Silas stopped walking. What? Your clothes were all wet when you came back from the Black Hills, and Dutch kept acting strange around the falls when we walked past there once. I figured something happened. Timothy looked up at him with those eyes Emma said came from Jacob. You found something important, didn't you? The boy was perceptive. More than Silas had credited. Maybe I did. But Timothy, if I tell you something, you have to promise to keep it quiet. Can you do that? Yes, sir. I promise. Sometimes when we find truth that challenges what we want to believe, we have a choice. We can ignore it to stay comfortable, or we can face it even though it hurts. Your grandfather Jacob made that choice once, chose truth over comfort. That's real courage. Timothy digested this solemnly. The governor isn't what he pretends, is he? No, he's not. Will you prove it? I'm going to try. They walked the rest of the way in silence. At the boarding house, Dutch waited patiently on the porch. He greeted them with tail wags and seemed relieved to have Silas back safely. Emma was in the kitchen preparing supper. She took one look at Silas's face and knew something had shifted. He knows, Silas said quietly, checking to make sure Timothy was upstairs. Caldwell knows someone was in the Black Hills. Doesn't know it was me specifically yet, but he's suspicious. What will you do? Move faster than I planned. Can't give him time to destroy evidence or prepare defenses. Silas pulled out his journal and the photograph from Jacob's trunk. I need to find the other survivors from this regiment. Need their testimonies to corroborate the documentary evidence. How will you find them? Start with military records. Track them the way I'd track anything else. Follow the trail wherever it leads. He looked at her seriously. Emma, you and Timothy should consider leaving town for a while. Stay with relatives, maybe. Until this is over. This is my home. Silas Hart. I'm not running from corruption, not even corruption that wears a governor's title. She set down her cooking spoon with finality. Besides, you'll need someone watching your back. Someone to get word out if Caldwell tries to silence you. It's dangerous. Most worthwhile things are. Emma smiled grimly. Jacob couldn't finish this fight, but maybe you and I together can. That night, Silas studied the photograph by lamplight, memorizing faces. These men deserved justice, deserved to have their truth told, deserved more than being forgotten casualties of one man's greed and ambition. Tomorrow, He'd begin searching for survivors, begin building a case that couldn't be ignored. But tonight he allowed himself to feel the weight of what he'd undertaken, one aging tracker and a boarding house widow against a territorial governor with wealth, power, and dangerous secrets to protect. Dutch rested his head on Silas's knee, offering silent support. "We're in deep now, boy," Silas whispered. "No turning back." Outside, a lone rider passed through town, heading north. One of Caldwell's men, Silas suspected, carrying messages, making preparations. The race had begun. The next morning brought news that Caldwell's entourage had departed for the next town on his campaign tour. The relief in Redemption Gulch was palpable, like a held breath finally released. But Silas knew the danger hadn't passed. It had just changed form. He returned to the attic with Emma after breakfast. Something about Jacob's trunk nagged at him. The letter they'd found had been carefully placed, deliberately preserved. But it felt incomplete, like Jacob had more to say. "Did Jacob keep a Bible?" Silas asked, remembering his own father's habit of tucking important papers between scripture pages. "Always." "It's in the trunk." Emma lifted out the worn leather volume. He read from it every night before bed, said it helped quiet the war memories. Silas opened the Bible carefully. It was well used, certain passages marked with pencil, margins filled with Jacob's neat handwriting, notes about faith, questions about forgiveness, reflections on duty and conscience. Between the pages of 2 Samuel, Silas found another letter. This one was sealed, addressed to Army Command, but with a note pinned to it. "To be sent only if something happens to me. J.B." He prepared for the possibility he wouldn't survive to send it himself, Emma whispered. Silas broke the seal with Emma's permission. The letter was dated a week after the first one they'd found, and its content was even more damning. Jacob wrote with painful precision about what he'd witnessed in the weeks before his discharge. Captain Caldwell meeting with Confederate scouts under flag of truce that lasted too long for simple prisoner exchange, money changing hands in a supply tent after dark, orders being given that contradicted normal procedures. And most damning, Jacob had overheard Caldwell discussing route information with someone who wasn't Union command. "I cannot prove these observations amount to treason," Jacob wrote, "but I know what I saw, and I know it was wrong. If I die under mysterious circumstances, please investigate Captain Thornton Caldwell. Check his finances. Question his orders during April 1865. The Union soldiers who died in the ambush near Copper Ridge deserve justice, even if I'm too cowardly to demand it while I live." The letter concluded with a paragraph that broke Silas's heart. "I am ashamed that I choose silence. My wife carries our first child, and I will not make her a widow or my unborn baby fatherless for the sake of accusations I cannot fully prove. I pray someone braver than I will one day hold Caldwell accountable. I pray those 47 men forgive me for surviving when they did not. I pray God understands that sometimes a man's duty to his family must outweigh his duty to justice. But I fear I will carry this guilt until I die." Emma wept quietly, tears falling onto the page. "He never said a word. 15 years he carried this, and I never knew. He was protecting you and Timothy," Silas said gently. "That took courage too, but it killed him just the same. The guilt, the weight of silence, it ate away at him until there was nothing left." She wiped her eyes with fierce determination. "We finish this, Silas. For Jacob, for those soldiers, for everyone." Silas added the letter to his growing packet of evidence, handling it with reverence. This was more than documentation. It was Jacob Brennan's last testimony, his final attempt to balance the scales of justice he'd been too afraid to address while living. That afternoon, Emma revealed information that changed everything. "I wasn't completely honest with you," she admitted as they sat in the boarding house parlor. "I told you Jacob died 7 years ago, but I didn't tell you how. He went to see someone, wouldn't tell me who or why. He took his Bible and these letters, said he was going to make things right. When he came back 3 days later, he was different, broken. He died 2 weeks after that. Doctor said it was his heart, but I think it was his spirit that gave out." "Who did he go see?" Silas asked. I don't know. But before he left, he wrote down 3 names and addresses, said these were men who might understand what he'd experienced. I found the paper in his desk after he died. She retrieved a yellowed scrap from her pocket. I kept it all these years, not knowing what to do with it. Silas studied the names. 3 survivors from Jacob's regiment scattered across the territory. Miles Weatherby, at a homestead 2 days' ride north. Samuel Potter, in the mining town of Silver Ridge. And a 3rd man, deceased according to Emma's notation. These men served in the same unit, Silas said, recognizing the names from the casualty list. They survived the ambush. They might be willing to testify. Jacob must have thought so, or he wouldn't have kept their information. Did he visit them before he died? I think he tried. That trip he took, he might have reached at least one of them, but whatever he learned or didn't learn, it destroyed him. Silas made his decision. I'm going to visit these men, gather their testimonies. With Jacob's letters, the documents from the cave, and eyewitness accounts from survivors, we'll have a case even Caldwell's influence can't suppress. It's dangerous. Caldwell has eyes everywhere, which is why I'll be careful. Silas studied the map in his mind, plotting routes. I'll visit Weatherby first, he's closest. Then Potter in Silver Ridge. If they're willing to speak out, we present everything to Federal Military Command together. Safety in numbers. Emma was quiet for a moment. What about Timothy and me? If Caldwell suspects you're building a case against him, he might use us to get to you. That's what worries me most. Silas had been thinking about this problem since the reception. Does Timothy have any relatives outside Redemption Gulch? My sister lives 3 towns over. She'd take him in for a while if I asked. Send him there. Today, if possible, make up a reason, visiting family, helping with farm work, anything that sounds normal. Just get him somewhere Caldwell's people won't look. And me? You stay here and act normal. Running would draw attention, but you keep the original documents safe. If anything happens to me, you know where to take them and who to tell. Emma nodded slowly. When do you leave? Tomorrow at dawn. I'll move fast, stay off main roads, use every tracking skill I have to avoid being followed. Dutch goes with you? Wouldn't leave him behind. He's saved my life more than once, and I suspect he'll need to again before this is done. They spent the evening making preparations. Emma packed supplies for Timothy's departure, explaining to the boy that his great-aunt needed help with harvest work. Timothy accepted this with only mild protest, sensing the adult's tension but not fully understanding it. Sheriff Masterson stopped by just before supper, ostensibly to check on a licensing matter. But his real purpose became clear when he pulled Silas aside. "Couple of strangers asking questions about you at the saloon this afternoon," the sheriff said quietly. "Wanted to know where you're staying, where you ride, if you have friends in town. Caldwell's men? Probably. I told them you're just a drifter passing through, no one worth their interest. But Hart, they're watching you. If you're involved in something that's going to cause trouble in my town, I need to know about it." Silas met Masterson's eyes. The sheriff was honest, but his first loyalty was to maintaining peace in Redemption Gulch. Could he be trusted with the full truth? Not yet, Silas decided. Not until the case was solid enough that Masterson's sense of justice would outweigh his political caution. "No trouble coming from me, Sheriff. Just a man trying to earn honest wages." Masterson didn't look convinced, but he let it drop. "Watch your back, Hart. Territory's got plenty of ways for men to disappear if the wrong people decide they're inconvenient." After the sheriff left, Silas sat on the porch with Dutch and his journal. The evening was cool, shadows lengthening as the sun dropped behind the western hills. Timothy had already departed with Emma's sister's hired man, carrying a small bag and promises to work hard. Emma brought out coffee and sat beside him. "You're taking on powerful enemies." "Seems to be a habit of mine. Never could walk past injustice without feeling obligated to do something about it." "Is that why you became a drifter after the war? Too much injustice in settled places?" Silas considered the question. "Maybe, or maybe I was just running from my own ghosts. War changes men in different ways. Some go home and rebuild. Others can't seem to find home again. Have you found it now? He looked at her, this woman who'd buried a husband too young, raised a grandson alone, kept a boarding house running through hard times, and was now willing to risk everything for truth. Maybe I'm starting to, he admitted quietly. They sat in comfortable silence, until full dark fell. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Dutch's ears pricked up, but he didn't respond, just pressed closer to Silas's leg, offering steady presence. Tomorrow the real work began, finding witnesses, building testimony, creating a case that could bring down a governor and expose 15 years of lies. Tonight, Silas allowed himself to feel the weight of what Jacob Brennan had carried alone for so long, the guilt of silence, the fear of consequences, the impossible choice between justice and protecting family. "I won't let your silence be wasted," Silas whispered to Jacob's memory. "Your courage in writing these letters, even if you couldn't send them, gave us the foundation we needed. Now I'll finish what you started." Emma heard him and placed her hand over his. No words needed, just understanding between two people united in purpose. Inside the boarding house, lamplight flickered in the windows, ordinary life continuing while extraordinary events prepared to unfold. By this time next week, everything might be different, if Silas survived to make it so. Dutch sighed and settled his head on Silas's boot. The dog knew a journey was coming, knew danger waited ahead. But wherever Silas went, Dutch would follow. That was what loyalty meant, and loyalty in the end was what this entire fight was about. Loyalty betrayed, loyalty tested, loyalty proven through sacrifice. Silas closed his journal and stood. "Get some rest, boy. Tomorrow we ride hard." The stars emerged one by one overhead, constant and unchanging, bearing witness to human struggles far below, keeping their counsel, marking true north for those who knew how to read them. Silas touched the compass in his pocket, his father's compass, his moral and physical guide. Time to follow it toward justice, wherever that path led. Silas left Redemption Gulch before first light, taking trails that avoided main roads. Dutch ranged ahead, alert for any sign of watchers or pursuit. The territory was beautiful in the early morning, all golden light and long shadows, but Silas barely noticed. His mind was focused on the task ahead. Miles Weatherby's homestead sat in a valley where the grassland met pine forest. It took Silas a day and a half of hard riding to reach it, staying off roads and using terrain to hide his passage. If Caldwell's men were watching, he didn't want to lead them directly to a witness. The farm looked tired. Fields were planted but poorly tended, fences sagged, and the house needed paint and repair. A few chickens scratched in the yard, and an old horse watched Silas's approach with disinterest from a corral that had seen better days. Silas dismounted and approached on foot, hands visible. Dutch stayed close, reading Silas's caution. The man who emerged from the house was in his late 60s, wearing work clothes that hung loose on a frame that had once been heavier. He carried a rifle with the easy competence of someone who'd used weapons regularly. His face showed the weathering of outdoor work and the deeper lines of long-carried pain. "Help you?" Weatherby's voice was rough, unwelcoming. "My name's Silas Hart. I'm looking for Miles Weatherby." "Why?" "Because I have questions about April 1865, Captain Thornton Caldwell, and 47 men who died near Copper Ridge." The rifle lowered slightly. Weatherby's face changed from suspicion to something more complex. Pain, perhaps, or recognition. "How do you know about that?" "Found evidence. Documents hidden away for 15 years. I need someone who was there to tell me the truth." Weatherby stared at him for a long moment, then turned and walked back toward the house. "Come on, then. But the dog stays outside. He goes where I go. Suit yourself." Inside, the house was as worn as its owner. Minimal furniture, dishes stacked by a pump sink, a single room serving as kitchen, dining, and living space. but it was clean, maintained with the discipline of a soldier who'd never quite stopped following regiment rules. Weatherby set the rifle by the door and gestured to a chair. "Coffee? Appreciate it." While Weatherby worked the stove, Silas pulled out the photograph from Jacob's trunk. He set it on the table. The old soldier froze when he spotted it. His hand shook slightly as he reached for the image. "Where'd you get this?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "Man named Jacob Brennan. He served with you. Kept this after the war. He's dead now, but before he died, he wrote letters about what he suspected regarding Caldwell." Weatherby sank into a chair, still staring at the photograph. "Jacob, haven't thought about him in years. He got discharged right before it happened. Lucky bastard." He didn't feel lucky. Guilt killed him eventually. Guilt. Weatherby's laugh was bitter. "We all carry it. Everyone who survived. We know something was wrong, but we could never prove it. Tell me what happened." Weatherby was quiet for so long, Silas thought he might refuse. But then words began spilling out, 15 years of silence finally breaking. "I was on perimeter guard that day. Standard patrol, supposedly watching for Confederate scouts. But the attack came from a direction only Union command knew about. They hit us perfectly, caught the main column at their most vulnerable, blocked escape routes, coordinated assault like they'd been planning it for weeks. Which they had. Only we didn't know that. You survived because you were on the perimeter. Survived because I was too far from the main fight to help. Watched my friends die while I stood there useless." Weatherby's voice cracked. "Tried to warn command, but orders were to hold position. By the time I could move, it was over. 47 men dead. Confederate forces disappeared with a Union payroll worth thousands. You suspected Caldwell immediately. Not at first, but afterward things didn't add up. The Confederates knew too much. Their timing was perfect, and Caldwell's reaction was wrong. He acted devastated, but his eyes were calculating, like he was worried about something other than his dead men. After the war, when Caldwell became wealthy, that confirmed it. Man went from captain's pay to territorial influence within 2 years. Claimed it was smart investments and family money. But I knew. We all knew." Weatherby gestured to the photograph. "Some of us talked about it. Agreed someone should investigate. But who'd believe common soldiers over a war hero officer? Who'd care about old accusations when everyone just wanted to move on? I care, and I have proof." Silas pulled out copies of the documents from the cave. Caldwell kept records. Financial ledgers, correspondence with Confederate agents, proof he sold out his own men. Weatherby read through the papers with shaking hands. When he finished, tears ran down his weathered face. "Finally, God. Finally someone believes us. Will you testify? Federal Military Tribunal. On record. Help me bring him to justice? In a heartbeat. If other survivors will too. Safety in numbers. I'm visiting Samuel Potter next, and I need something from you, anything that adds to the evidence. Documents, testimony, physical proof." Weatherby stood and crossed to a chest in the corner. He opened it and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside was a medal, the Medal of Honor, tarnished but recognizable. "They gave me this," he said quietly, "for surviving, for heroism under fire. But I wasn't a hero. I just lived while better men died." He held it out to Silas. "Take it. Give it to someone who actually deserves it. When you prove Caldwell's guilt, this blood-stained thing might remind people what real honor looks like." Silas accepted the medal with reverence. "I'll keep it safe. Use it when the time comes to show what's been lost." They spent another hour documenting Weatherby's testimony. Silas wrote carefully in his journal, recording dates, places, observations, everything that might matter when facing federal authorities. As Silas prepared to leave, Weatherby gripped his arm. "You're making powerful enemies. Caldwell won't let this evidence reach authorities without a fight. I know. Then watch your back. And Hart, thank you. For Jacob, for all of us, thank you for caring about old injustice." Silas rode away from the homestead, feeling the weight of Weatherby's medal in his saddlebag. One witness secured. One testimony documented. But also one more person Caldwell might target if he learned they'd spoken. The trail to Silver Ridge took him through mountain passes that made good time but offered limited escape routes. Silas kept Dutch close and his rifle ready. Late afternoon on the second day, his caution proved warranted. 3 riders appeared ahead, blocking the trail through a narrow canyon. They weren't trying to hide their intention. Their horses stood across the path, and the men sat, easy in their saddles, with hands near their weapons. Silas pulled up 50 yards away, assessing options. Behind him, the trail wound back through exposed ground. To either side, steep canyon walls offered no escape. Forward was the only option, and forward meant through those riders. "That's far enough, Hart," the leader called. "Got something that belongs to Governor Caldwell. We're here to collect it. I don't have anything of the governor's. Papers you took from the Black Hills. Hand them over, and we'll let you ride away," Dutch growled low, sensing danger. Silas touched the dog's head, keeping him calm. "Not going to happen," Silas said clearly. "Then we take them off your body." The riders moved forward as one. Silas had seconds to decide: fight, flee, or surrender. Fighting 3 armed men in a canyon was suicide. Surrendering meant death anyway, once they had the documents. Which left one option. He spurred his horse hard to the right, toward the steepest part of the canyon wall. Dutch followed instantly. The terrain was too steep for horses, but that was the point. Silas dismounted at a dead run, slapping his horse's rump to send it ahead, while he scrambled up the rocky slope with Dutch at his heels. Gunfire erupted behind him. Bullets sparked off rocks. Silas zigzagged, using cover, climbing with desperate speed toward higher ground. Dutch reached a ledge and turned back, barking urgently. Silas hauled himself up beside the dog just as another shot whined past his head. The riders had dismounted and were following, climbing awkwardly with rifles in hand. But they were heavier men, less accustomed to this kind of movement. Silas had spent a lifetime moving through difficult terrain. He reached a position with good cover and clear sightlines, set his rifle across a rock and took aim. "Stop there," he called down. "I don't want to kill you, but I will if pressed." The leader paused, assessing. He'd expected easy intimidation, not competent resistance. "You can't stay up there forever, old man." "Don't need forever. Just need you to leave." A tense standoff developed. The riders had the numbers, but Silas had position and skill. Neither side wanted to escalate to actual killing, but neither could afford to back down. Then Dutch barked again, different tone. Warning. Silas glanced back and saw blue uniforms cresting the ridge above them. Federal Border Patrol, attracted by the gunfire. The leader of the hired guns saw them too, his face darkened with frustration. "This isn't over, Hart. Governor's got long reach and good memory. Tell the governor I look forward to speaking with him." In federal court. The riders retreated, mounting up and riding back the way they'd come. Silas stayed in position until they were out of sight, then climbed up to meet the patrol. Captain James Morrison commanded the unit, a professional soldier who listened to Silas's explanation with sharp attention. "You're claiming territorial governor is a Confederate spy?" Morrison said when Silas finished. "I'm claiming I have evidence that needs federal investigation. Evidence serious enough that hired guns just tried to kill me for it." Morrison studied Silas carefully. "Show me." Silas produced copies of the documents. Morrison examined them with the eye of someone trained in military intelligence. His expression grew increasingly grave. "If this is legitimate, it's conspiracy reaching the highest levels. It's legitimate, and I have witnesses willing to testify. But they need federal protection, same as I do." Morrison made his decision. "You're coming with us to the border post. We'll send this evidence to military command with priority dispatch. Until we get orders, you're under federal protection." Silas felt tension he'd been carrying for days finally ease. He'd reached legitimate authority. The truth would get through now, whatever Caldwell tried. Dutch pressed against his leg, exhausted but relieved. They'd survived another close call and now had powerful allies. The race wasn't over, but the finish line was finally in sight. The federal border post sat in a valley that commanded views of 3 territorial boundaries. Morrison's men took Silas directly to the commanding officer's quarters, where telegraph equipment connected to military command back east. While Morrison sent priority messages, a veterinarian examined Dutch's worn paws and gave him food and water. Silas watched his companion eat with good appetite, grateful the dog had survived another dangerous day. "Your animal's in good shape considering what you've put him through," the veterinarian said. "He's loyal. Probably saved your life more than once. More times than I can count." Morrison returned 2 hours later with news. "Command wants full documentation. Every piece of evidence, every witness testimony, everything. They're treating this as potential treason case with territorial implications. Until we have clear orders, you're staying here under guard. I still need to reach Samuel Potter. He's another witness, and if Caldwell's men are looking for me, Potter might be in danger. Where's he located?" "Silver Ridge. Mining town. 2 days north." Morrison considered. "I'll send a detail to retrieve him. Protective custody?" "Same as you. If he corroborates your evidence, we'll have even stronger case." But Silas shook his head. "Potter knows me from military records. He'll trust me more than strange soldiers showing up at his door. Let me go with your men. I'll do the talking." Morrison agreed reluctantly. "Sergeant Walker and 5 men will escort you. First sign of trouble, you follow Walker's orders." "Understood?" "Understood." They rode out at dawn, a proper military unit with Silas and Dutch at the center. The presence of federal authority changed everything. Caldwell's hired guns wouldn't dare attack a uniformed patrol, or so Silas hoped. Silver Ridge sprawled across a hillside where veins of silver had been discovered 15 years earlier. The town had the temporary look of mining settlements hastily built, designed for extraction rather than permanence. But it had survived longer than most boom towns, suggesting the silver was holding out. Samuel Potter's assay office sat on the main street, a small building with precise lettering on the window. Inside, Potter worked at a desk, covered with ore samples and testing equipment. He looked up when Silas entered, his eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed spectacles. "Help you, Mr. Potter? My name's Silas Hart. I served with Union scouts during the war. I'm here about Captain Thornton Caldwell and what happened in April 1865. Potter's face went still. He glanced at the federal soldiers visible through the window, then back to Silas. "Close the door." Once they had privacy, Potter pulled off his spectacles and rubbed his eyes. "I wondered if this day would ever come. Hoped for it, feared it, never quite believed it. You knew Caldwell was corrupt, suspected, never could prove it." Potter gestured to a chair. "I was company clerk, handled correspondence, kept records, managed paperwork. You'd be surprised what a clerk sees that others miss." Over the next hour, Potter laid out his evidence. He'd kept meticulous records, copying documents he thought suspicious, noting discrepancies between official orders and actual events. His accountant's mind had caught patterns others missed. "Money didn't add up," Potter explained. "Requisitions for supplies that never arrived. Payroll withdrawals larger than they should be. Small things, each explainable individually. But together they suggested systematic theft." "Did you report your suspicions?" "Tried to. Was told clerks should stick to copying and filing. After the ambush, when so many died, I documented everything I could, kept copies hidden. Thought someday they'd matter." Silas showed Potter the documents from the cave. The older man examined them with professional attention, nodding recognition at several items. "I remember these requisition forms. I filed the originals. But there's more here than I ever saw. Where'd you find this?" "Hidden cave behind Silver Vale Falls. Smart hiding place. But why keep evidence at all? Why not destroy it?" "Insurance," Silas said. "In case his Confederate allies ever tried to betray him. Proof he could use to take them down with him if needed." Potter nodded slowly. "Makes sense. Betrayers trust no one because they know how easy betrayal is." He stood and crossed to a locked cabinet. "There's something else. Something I never understood until now." He pulled out a small leather Bible, worn and water-stained. Found this in Caldwell's abandoned quarters after the war ended. It was left behind, probably because it got damaged. I kept it because the inscription seemed odd. Silas opened the Bible. Inside the cover, written in faded ink, "To my son Thornton from your loving father, General Marcus Caldwell, CSA, CSA, Confederate States of America." Caldwell's father was a Confederate general? Silas felt his understanding of the situation shift. Not just any general. Marcus Caldwell was military intelligence officer. Ran spy networks. Potter pulled out more papers. After I found the Bible, I did research. Marcus Caldwell died in 1866, just after the war. His son Thornton supposedly served Union the entire war, but these dates don't match up. Silas examined the Bible more carefully. Hidden in a small pocket behind the back cover were coded letters. Military cipher he recognized from his scouting days, Confederate intelligence format. "Do you know how to read this code?" Potter asked. "Enough. Give me time." They worked through the afternoon, Potter's precise mind helping crack the cipher. What emerged was devastating. Thornton Caldwell wasn't just a corrupt Union officer. He'd been a Confederate spy the entire war, embedded in Union ranks by his father, feeding intelligence for years. The ambush wasn't opportunistic theft. It was a planned intelligence operation that Caldwell repurposed into personal profit when it became clear the Confederacy was losing. Letter after letter detailed his work. Troop movements reported, supply routes revealed, officers' plans transmitted to Confederate command. Dozens of operations compromised. Hundreds, maybe thousands of Union casualties caused by information Caldwell provided. "Sweet, merciful heaven," Potter whispered as the truth became clear. He wasn't just a thief. He was enemy agent all along. Silas felt sick. This transformed everything. Caldwell hadn't just betrayed his men for money. He'd spent years systematically undermining the Union war effort while pretending to serve it. The ambush that killed 47 men was just one visible result of systematic, long-term treason. After the war, Silas said slowly, working through implications, he used his father's Confederate network to build post-war influence. Former Confederates who knew his secret protected him because they'd be exposed too if he went down. "That's why he's politically untouchable," Potter agreed. Half the territorial power structure is former Confederate sympathizers who benefited from reconciliation policies. They're protecting one of their own. How many people know about this? In its entirety? Maybe a handful. The network operates on compartmentalization. Each person knows only their piece. But Caldwell's at the center, holding it all together. If he goes down, he could expose dozens of others, which meant Caldwell had even more motivation to protect his secret. This wasn't just about personal consequences anymore. It was about protecting an entire post-war conspiracy. Silas gathered the evidence carefully. The Bible, the coded letters, Potter's records, everything that proved the full scope of Caldwell's betrayal. "You need to come with me," Silas said. "Federal protection, military tribunal testimony, everything official. I'll go." Potter stood with determination. "Been waiting 15 years to tell this truth." "But Hart, you understand what we're really taking on here? This isn't just one corrupt governor. It's a network of powerful people with everything to lose. They'll fight back with everything they have. Then we'd better make sure the evidence reaches people they can't threaten or bribe." Sergeant Walker secured Potter's office and arranged transport. Within the hour, they were riding back toward the border post with documents that could shake the entire territory's political foundation. But as they left Silver Ridge, Silas noticed something that made his blood run cold. A telegraph operator emerged from the office and mounted a fast horse, riding hard toward the territorial capital. Someone had informed Caldwell that Potter was being taken into federal custody. The race had just accelerated. That night, camped under guard, Silas studied the full weight of evidence they'd assembled. It was overwhelming, undeniable. the kind of proof that could bring down not just Caldwell, but an entire network of former Confederates who'd infiltrated territorial governance. Dutch lay beside him, finally resting after days of hard travel. The dog's presence was comforting, a reminder that loyalty, real loyalty, still existed in a world that seemed built on lies. Potter sat across the fire, writing out formal testimony in his precise hand. "You know what's strange?" he said quietly. "Part of me always hoped I was wrong, that my suspicions were just paranoia from too much time handling paperwork, but I wasn't wrong." "No," Silas agreed. "You weren't. Those 47 men in the ambush, all the other operations Caldwell compromised, all the Union soldiers who died because of intelligence he provided. How do we calculate that debt? We don't. We just make sure it's finally acknowledged and punished." Morrison joined them, having received updated orders from military command. "Washington's taking this seriously. They're sending federal marshals and a military tribunal. Should arrive in 5 days. Until then, we hold position here and keep you both safe." "What about the other witnesses?" Silas asked. "Weatherby, Emma Brennan, anyone else who might corroborate our evidence?" "Already sent protective details. They'll be brought here within 2 days. Silas felt something like hope. The machinery of justice, slow but powerful, was finally moving. Caldwell's decades of deception were coming to an end. But the next morning brought news that changed everything again. A rider from Redemption Gulch arrived with urgent message. Caldwell had returned to town with armed men. He'd declared Silas and Potter wanted for theft of government documents. Sheriff Masterson had been ordered to arrest anyone harboring them, and Emma Brennan's boarding house had been searched. "Is she safe?" Silas demanded. "She's fine. Caldwell's men didn't find what they were looking for. She'd hidden the original documents too well. But Hart, he's making his move. Consolidating power before federal authorities can act. He knows his time's running out." Morrison studied the map. "We need to get you and the evidence to territorial capital before Caldwell can block access to federal authorities. If he controls the territory's legal system, he might try to prevent federal jurisdiction. Can he do that?" "He can try. Territorial rights versus federal authority, it's always been murky. If he moves fast enough, if he has enough allies, he might delay justice long enough to destroy remaining evidence and eliminate witnesses." Silas looked at Dutch, at Potter, at the soldiers who'd risked themselves protecting evidence that threatened powerful men. All of them in danger because one man had built an empire on betrayal and blood. "Then we don't wait for the marshals," Silas decided. "We go to him, force the confrontation on our terms before he can fully prepare." "That's suicide," Potter said. "He'll kill us both." "Not if we do it publicly, with federal military presence, in front of witnesses who can't all be silenced." Silas turned to Morrison. "Can you get us to Redemption Gulch with enough soldiers to ensure our safety?" Morrison considered it. "It's risky, but if we move fast, if we force Caldwell to face charges publicly before he can coordinate his defenses, we might end this before it becomes territorial civil conflict." "Then that's what we do," Silas said. "End this where it started. In front of the people Caldwell's been deceiving for 15 years. Dutch stood and shook himself, ready for another journey. The dog didn't understand politics or conspiracies, but he understood that Silas was heading into danger, and where Silas went, Dutch would follow, to the end, whatever that might be. The federal cavalry moved out at dawn, 20 soldiers under Morrison's command, plus Silas, Potter, and Dutch. They rode in formation, military precision that broadcast federal authority. This wasn't a secret mission anymore. It was official action that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. 3 days of hard riding stood between them and Redemption Gulch. 3 days for Caldwell to prepare defenses. 3 days for Silas to consider everything that might go wrong. He rode near the front of the column, Potter beside him. The assayer had traded his clerk's clothes for more practical riding gear borrowed from the border post, but he still looked uncomfortable on horseback. Dutch ranged ahead, scouting with the easy lope of a dog in his element. "You ever think we might be wrong?" Potter asked on the second day, "that maybe there's an explanation for all this evidence that doesn't require Caldwell to be a Confederate spy? Do you believe that?" "No, but I keep hoping I'm wrong anyway." Hope's a stubborn thing. Silas understood. Part of him still wanted to believe in simple answers, in a world where heroes were heroes and villains announced themselves clearly. But he'd lived too long and seen too much to believe in that world anymore. He pulled out his father's compass, checking their bearing. The brass was warm from his pocket, familiar in his hand. How many times had his father used this same compass? How many decisions had been guided by its true north? "My father gave me this before I went to war," Silas said, showing it to Potter. "Told me that no matter how confusing things got, the compass would always show true north. Said I should use it for more than just direction finding." "Moral compass," Potter said, understanding. "Something like that." He said a man could get lost in a lot of ways. Lost in the wilderness, lost in lies, lost in what's easy rather than what's right. But if you kept checking your bearing, kept making sure you were heading toward true north, you'd eventually get where you needed to be. Your father sounds wise. He served in the Mexican War, came home disillusioned about glory and patriotism, but he never stopped believing in doing right by your fellow man. Never stopped believing truth mattered. Silas returned the compass to his pocket. "He died while I was off scouting in the war. Never got to tell him how much his lessons meant. This compass is all I have left of him. He'd be proud of what you're doing now. Maybe, or maybe he'd say I'm a damn fool for taking on fights I can't win." Silas smiled slightly. "But I'd rather be a fool following my compass than a coward who looked away." They made camp that night in a defensible position, Morrison posting guards in shifts. Around the fire, soldiers talked in low voices about what waited in Redemption Gulch. They were good men, professional and disciplined, but they weren't blind to the risks. Arresting a territorial governor on treason charges could spark violence that would affect the entire region. Morrison sat beside Silas after making his rounds. "You understand what you're asking these men to do? If Caldwell has gathered enough armed support, this could turn into a shooting war." "I do understand, and I wouldn't ask it if there was another way. There's always another way. We could wait for the federal marshals, let them handle the arrest with full legal authority, by which time Caldwell will have destroyed evidence, intimidated witnesses, and positioned himself to claim any charges are politically motivated persecution. You know how these things work, Morrison. Power protects itself. The only way to overcome it is with speed and overwhelming legitimacy, which is why we're riding in uniform, in formation, with federal authority clearly displayed." Morrison poked at the fire with a stick. "Still dangerous. Still might end badly. Most things worth doing carry that risk." Morrison was quiet for a moment. "I read through all the evidence again tonight. The Bible, the coded letters, Caldwell's records. If even half of this is true, he's responsible for hundreds of casualties over years of war. Not just the 47 men in the ambush, but every operation his intelligence compromised. It's all true. Then he deserves military tribunal and whatever punishment they deem appropriate. But Hart, you need to prepare yourself for possibility that politics interferes, that powerful people protect him despite evidence, that justice gets delayed or denied entirely. If that happens, the evidence still exists, the testimonies are recorded. Truth has a way of surfacing eventually, even when it's buried. Spoken like a man who's made peace with his own mortality. Silas glanced at Dutch, sleeping peacefully despite tomorrow's uncertainty. Man, my age, has to make that peace regularly. Each day you wake up is borrowed time. Might as well spend it on something meaningful. The third day brought them within sight of Redemption Gulch. They paused on a ridge overlooking the valley, the town visible below in late afternoon light. Smoke rose from chimneys. People moved through streets on daily business. Everything looked normal, peaceful, unaware that judgment was riding in. "Caldwell's there," Morrison said, studying the town through field glasses. "I can see his campaign banners still up, and there's armed men positioned around the central square. More than normal town security. He's ready for us." "Appears so. Question is how ready." They descended into the valley as the sun touched the western horizon. The timing was deliberate, arriving with enough light to be clearly seen, but late enough that townspeople would be gathering for evening meals, maximizing witnesses. Sheriff Masterson met them at the town's edge, his face troubled. "Captain Morrison, Mr. Hart. Wasn't expecting federal cavalry." "Sheriff," Morrison said formally, "we're here on federal military business. Has Governor Caldwell been informed of our arrival?" "He has. He's waiting in the town square with his advisors. Said he's prepared to answer questions about, and I'm quoting here, false accusations made by convicted thieves and traitors." "I'm neither convicted nor a traitor," Silas said, quietly. "I know that. At least, I think I do." Masterson looked genuinely conflicted. "Caldwell showed me territorial arrest warrants for both you and Potter. Claims you stole classified documents. Says you're working with enemies of the territory to undermine legitimate government. And you believe that? I don't know what to believe anymore. All I know is my town's caught in the middle of something bigger than local law can handle." Masterson looked at Morrison. "I'm stepping aside for federal authority. Whatever happens tonight, it's on you." They rode into town in formation, military presence impossible to miss or dismiss. Townspeople emerged from buildings, drawn by the unusual sight. Silas saw Emma standing on the boarding house porch, Timothy beside her, despite the boy supposedly being with her sister. Their faces showed relief and worry in equal measure. The town square had been transformed. Caldwell had positioned himself on the platform used for his speeches, surrounded by well-dressed advisors and armed men who tried to look like legitimate security. Behind them hung territorial flags and campaign banners, creating the image of official authority. But Silas noted the nervous energy in Caldwell's stance. The man was scared, though he hid it well behind practiced confidence. Morrison led the cavalry to a position facing the platform. He dismounted, and Silas followed. Dutch stayed close, hackles raised at the tension in the air. "Governor Caldwell," Morrison announced, his voice carrying across the square. "I'm Captain James Morrison, United States Army. I'm here to inform you of serious charges filed with military command and to request your cooperation in their investigation." "Captain Morrison," Caldwell responded smoothly. "I'm aware of these charges. They're false accusations made by men with criminal records and suspicious motives. I'm prepared to defend myself through proper legal channels, territorial courts, not military tribunals. The charges involve wartime treason, espionage, and murder of federal soldiers. That places them under military jurisdiction, not territorial. I served the Union honorably throughout the war. These accusations are politically motivated lies." Silas stepped forward. The crowd had grown to include most of the town. He saw familiar faces: Emma, Timothy, the surveyor Phillips, teacher Sarah, rancher Hartley. People he'd shared meals with, worked for, lived among. They deserved to hear truth. "Governor Caldwell," Silas said clearly, "my name is Silas Hart. I found evidence you kept hidden behind Silver Vale Falls. Evidence proving you sold Union soldiers to Confederate forces in April 1865. Evidence showing you profited from their deaths. And evidence proving you weren't Union officer at all, but Confederate spy embedded in federal ranks," the crowd murmured. Caldwell's face remained composed, but his eyes flickered with calculation. "Mr. Hart, your mental state has clearly been compromised by years of drifting, and I have documents in your handwriting. I have coded letters from your father, Confederate General Marcus Caldwell. I have financial records showing how you split stolen Union payroll. I have testimony from survivors of the ambush you arranged. And I have witnesses who can verify every claim." Potter stepped forward. "Samuel Potter, company clerk, served under Captain Caldwell during the war. I kept records that prove systematic theft and intelligence compromise. I'm prepared to testify under oath." Morrison produced the evidence packet. Governor Caldwell, these documents will be examined by federal authorities. You can cooperate now, or you can be compelled to cooperate. But cooperation will happen. For a long moment, everything balanced on a knife's edge. Caldwell could order his armed men to resist, could try to rally townspeople to his defense, could attempt to use territorial authority to block federal jurisdiction. But Silas saw the moment Caldwell's confidence cracked, saw him realize that too many people had heard too much, that even if he escaped immediate arrest, the accusations would follow him, that his carefully constructed lie was collapsing. "I demand legal representation," Caldwell said stiffly. "And I refuse to be tried by military tribunal without proper—" "You'll get every legal protection entitled to you," Morrison interrupted. "But you're coming into federal custody tonight." "Non-negotiable." Emma's voice cut through the tension. "He gave my grandson a watch, inscribed from Richmond, 1865, Confederate Richmond. I kept it safe." She held up Timothy's silver watch. In the square's torchlight, the inscription was visible to nearby townspeople. "My husband, Jacob Brennan, served under you," Emma continued, her voice strong despite years of grief. "He suspected what you were. It ate at him until he died. But before he died, he wrote down everything he'd seen. Everything he'd been too afraid to report during the war. Those letters are with federal authorities now." More murmurs from the crowd. People who'd cheered Caldwell's speeches, believed his promises, trusted his supposed integrity. Doubt spreading like ripples in a pond. "I was his clerk," Potter added. "I filed his paperwork, saw discrepancies I couldn't explain. Until now, I visited Miles Weatherby," Silas said. "Survivor of the ambush. He'll testify about what he witnessed, about how Confederate forces knew exactly where Union troops would be, about how only one person could have provided that intelligence, the weight of multiple voices, multiple pieces of evidence, multiple witnesses. It was crushing." Caldwell looked at his advisors, but they were stepping back, distancing themselves. His armed men were uncertain, unwilling to fight federal soldiers for a cause they now doubted. Sheriff Masterson moved to stand beside Morrison, a symbolic choice, territorial law, deferring to federal authority, supporting justice over politics. "Thornton Caldwell," Morrison said formally, "by authority of United States Military Command, you're being placed under arrest on charges of treason, espionage, conspiracy, and murder. You'll be held pending military tribunal. Do you understand these charges?" Caldwell's face was stone. All his charisma, all his practiced charm, stripped away to reveal the cold calculation beneath. "I understand, and I have nothing to say without my lawyers present." "That's your right," Morrison signaled his soldiers. They moved forward to take Caldwell into custody. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the territory's governor was arrested in his own political stronghold. Some looked vindicated, others shocked, many simply confused, but they were all witnesses to justice finally arriving, however delayed. Silas felt Dutch press against his leg. The dog sensed his tension releasing, the immediate danger passing. Timothy broke free from Emma and ran to Silas, hugging him with the fervor of a boy who'd learned hard lessons about heroes and truth. "You did it," Timothy whispered. "You actually did it." "We did it," Silas corrected. "Your grandfather, your grandmother, Potter, Weatherby, everyone who kept truth alive when it would have been easier to forget." Emma approached more slowly, her eyes bright with tears. "Jacob can rest now. Finally, he can rest." Morrison organized the transfer to federal custody. Caldwell would be taken to the border post that night, then to territorial capital under heavy guard to await the military tribunal. His advisors were being detained for questioning. His armed men were disarmed and investigated. The conspiracy Caldwell had built over 15 years was unraveling in a single evening. As the cavalry prepared to depart with their prisoner, Silas pulled out his father's compass one more time. He'd followed it truly, had kept heading toward justice despite every obstacle and danger. Had trusted that true north, when followed faithfully, would lead where it needed to. The compass face caught torchlight, its needle pointing steadily northward. constant, reliable. True. Thank you, Pa, Silas whispered, for teaching me which way to go. Dutch barked softly, ready to go home, ready to rest after long days of danger and travel. Silas smiled and scratched the dog's ears. Soon, boy. Just need to finish this properly first. One more day to see Caldwell securely imprisoned. One more day to give formal testimony. One more day to ensure justice couldn't be derailed at the last moment. Then they could rest. Then they could build whatever came next. But tonight, standing in the square where Caldwell had spoken his lies, Silas felt something he hadn't felt in years. Satisfaction. The kind that came from seeing wrong made right, from standing for truth when it cost something, from following your compass all the way home. The cavalry moved out within the hour, Caldwell secured in a military wagon under guard. Morrison wanted distance from Redemption Gulch before any of the governor's remaining allies could organize resistance. Silas rode with them, unwilling to let the evidence or the prisoner out of his sight until both reached federal authority. Emma and Timothy stood on the boarding house porch, watching the column depart. Silas raised a hand in farewell, promising silently to return once this was finished. Emma's answering wave carried years of gratitude and relief. The first hours passed in tense silence. Caldwell sat in the wagon without speaking, his face expressionless. But Silas saw the man's mind working, calculating angles, searching for escape or leverage. Men like Caldwell didn't surrender easily. They fought until the very end, using every resource and advantage they could find. Morrison posted extra guards around the wagon and doubled the night watch rotation. He's dangerous until he's behind bars at the border post. Maybe even after that. Men with his connections have ways of reaching out, ways of influencing events. You think his network will try to free him? I think they'll try something. Too much at stake for them to let him face tribunal without attempting rescue or silence. Silas understood. If Caldwell testified to save himself, he could expose dozens of other former Confederates who'd infiltrated territorial governance. His knowledge made him simultaneously valuable and dangerous to his former allies. They made camp at midnight in a defensible position, rocky ground with clear sightlines and limited approaches. The soldiers worked with quiet efficiency, establishing perimeter, posting guards, securing the prisoner. Professional and thorough. Caldwell was given a tent under guard. Before entering, he looked at Silas with expression that held no pretense now, just cold hatred. You've destroyed everything I built, Caldwell said quietly. I destroyed nothing. Your lies were always going to collapse eventually. I just hastened the process. You're a fool if you think justice will be served. Powerful people protect their own. I'll be free within a month, and you'll be dead within 2. Maybe. But those 47 men you killed will still be vindicated. Jacob Brennan will finally have peace. Truth will be recorded for history. That's worth whatever happens to me. Noble sentiments from a drifter nobody will remember. Caldwell smiled without warmth. History is written by winners, Hart, and I've been winning for 15 years. Not any more. Guards escorted Caldwell into the tent. Silas moved to the fire where Potter sat nursing coffee and exhaustion. He threatened you? Potter asked. Expected nothing less. Man like that doesn't go quietly. Think his people will try something? Rivar. Probably. Morrison's ready for it. Silas poured his own coffee, grateful for the warmth. How are you holding up? Terrified and elated in equal measure. Spent 15 years wondering if I'd imagined the corruption, if my suspicions were paranoia. Now it's proven real. It's almost worse. Means all those deaths were preventable. Means we could have stopped him sooner if we'd been braver. Courage isn't about never being afraid. It's about doing right things despite fear. You kept those records when it would have been safer to destroy them. You testified when staying silent would have protected you. That's real courage. They were interrupted by commotion at the perimeter. One of Morrison's scouts rode in hard, his horse lathered from fast travel. Captain! Armed riders approaching from the south. Maybe 15 men, moving fast. Morrison was on his feet instantly, issuing orders. Soldiers moved to defensive positions. Weapons were checked. The camp transformed, from resting space to fortress in moments. "Could be coincidence," Morrison said to Silas. "Could be travelers using the same trail. You don't believe that any more than I do." "No. I think Caldwell's people are making their move." The approaching riders came into view as the moon rose silhouettes against the sky, moving with purpose toward the camp. They stopped just outside rifle range, and a single rider advanced under flag of truce. Morrison met him at the perimeter with Silas at his side. The rider was well-dressed, educated bearing, clearly someone of standing rather than a common hired gun. "Captain Morrison," the man said formally. "My name is Charles Whitmore, attorney representing Governor Caldwell. I'm here to demand my client's immediate release. He's being held without proper warrant or due process. He's being held under federal military authority on charges of wartime treason," Morrison interrupted. "Territorial attorneys have no jurisdiction. That's disputed. Governor Caldwell demands proper legal representation and refuses to recognize military tribunal authority over territorial officers. His demands are noted and denied. Now turn around and ride back to whoever sent you. This prisoner is going to federal custody, and anyone who interferes will be charged with obstruction." Whitmore's face hardened. "You're making a mistake, Captain. There are procedures, protocols. You can't simply arrest a sitting governor without—" "I can, when that governor is an enemy spy who killed federal soldiers, which he is, as documented evidence proves. Now, leave my camp before I add you to the list of people being detained for questioning." For a moment, tension balanced on edge of violence. The riders behind Whitmore shifted in their saddles. Morrison soldiers tightened grips on weapons. One wrong move could trigger shooting that would leave bodies on both sides. Then Silas stepped forward. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm the man who found the evidence. I've read every document, interviewed every witness, traced every thread of Caldwell's conspiracy. If you want to represent him, you should know exactly what you're defending." He pulled from his saddlebag something he'd brought from the border post, the tattered fragment of cavalry guidon that had flown over the ambushed regiment. Blood-stained, burned, torn by Confederate bullets. 47 men died under this flag," Silas said, holding it up in the moonlight. "Died because their commanding officer sold them to the enemy. You want to defend that? You want to build legal arguments protecting a man who profited from their murders? That's your choice. But know what you're defending." Whitmore stared at the guidon. Even in darkness, the bloodstains were visible. The reality of what Caldwell had done, made physical and undeniable. "I'll need to consult with my client," Whitmore said, his voice less certain now. "Your client will have legal representation at his tribunal," Morrison said firmly. "But tonight he remains in federal custody. If you want to be that representation, present yourself properly through official channels. Riding in with armed men isn't how legitimate lawyers operate." Whitmore retreated to confer with his companions. Angry words carried across the distance, though specifics were unclear. Finally, the group turned and rode away, leaving threats implied, but not acted upon. "They'll be back," Morrison predicted. "Different approach next time. Might try legal maneuvers, might try actual rescue attempt. We need to reach the border post by tomorrow night." They broke camp before dawn, pushing hard. Caldwell remained silent, offering no information or cooperation, just cold stares and calculations. By afternoon they were within hours of safety. The border post was visible in the distance, federal authority and secure detention cells waiting, but the final miles proved most dangerous. The canyon they had to traverse, the same one where Silas had fought off hired guns days earlier, now held potential ambush positions that couldn't be avoided. Morrison sent scouts ahead, but the terrain limited their effectiveness. Halfway through the canyon, gunfire erupted, not from the riders who'd approached under truce, but from positions above. Professional military ambush, coordinated and devastating. Morrison's soldiers returned fire, but they were caught in a kill zone. "Protect the prisoner," Morrison shouted, even as his men sought cover. Silas grabbed Dutch and dove behind rocks. Potter was beside him, face white with terror but weapon drawn. Above them, muzzle flashes marked shooter positions. This wasn't about freeing Caldwell anymore, Silas realized. This was about silencing him permanently, making sure he never reached tribunal to testify against his former allies. Dead men told no tales, and a dead Caldwell was safer for the Confederate network than a captured one. The ambush had just become an assassination attempt, and everyone in the canyon was caught in its crossfire. The gunfight lasted maybe 5 minutes, but felt like hours. Morrison's soldiers were trained and disciplined, returning fire with precision despite being caught in ambush position. Silas worked his rifle methodically, picking targets when they exposed themselves, forcing the shooters to keep heads down. Dutch pressed against his side, silent but alert. The dog understood danger and trusted Silas to handle it. The wagon holding Caldwell had overturned in the initial volley. Guards pulled the former governor behind cover, even as bullets tore through canvas and wood. Whatever else he was, Caldwell was evidence and witness he had to survive to face justice. Then Potter shouted a warning, "Movement on the South Ridge!" Silas saw them, more shooters, moving to flank Morrison's position. Professional tactics, coordinated assault. Not hired guns anymore, but actual soldiers, probably former Confederates who'd never quite stopped fighting. "They're trying to pin us," Morrison called. "Hold position, concentrate fire on." His words were cut off by a bugle call that made every soldier in the canyon freeze. Not from the ambushes, but from behind them. Federal cavalry, a full company, cresting the ridge and descending into the canyon with colors flying. Reinforcements. Morrison must have sent for them from the border post when the lawyer approached last night. Professional caution paying off. The ambushers saw them too. Suddenly the tactical situation reversed. They were the ones caught between forces, their ambush becoming trap. A few tried to fight, but most broke and ran, scrambling up canyon walls or fleeing through side ravines. The cavalry pursued relentlessly. Within minutes, the gunfire stopped. The canyon filled with Federal soldiers securing prisoners and tending wounded. Silas lowered his rifle, hands shaking slightly from adrenaline. Dutch whined and pressed closer, seeking reassurance that the danger had passed. "Good boy," Silas whispered, checking the dog for injuries. "None, just scared but faithful." Morrison emerged from cover, bloodied from a graze across his shoulder, but otherwise functional. "Everyone report." 3 of his men were wounded, none critically. The wagon guards had protected Caldwell successfully. The former governor was bruised and shaken but alive, and Potter was unharmed, though his hands trembled as he reloaded his weapon with mechanical precision. The commanding officer of the reinforcements rode forward, Colonel Sarah Hutchins, stern-faced and competent. "Captain Morrison, we received your request for support and rode hard. Looks like we arrived just in time." "Appreciated, Colonel. These men were attempting to kill the prisoner before he could reach federal custody." "So I see." Hutchins studied the captured ambushers being rounded up by her soldiers. "Interesting group. Several former Confederate officers, some territorial officials, couple of lawyers. Almost like they had something to protect. They did. A conspiracy 15 years old and reaching high levels of territorial government." Morrison gestured to Silas. "This man exposed it. Former Union scout named Silas Hart." Hutchins dismounted and approached Silas, studying him with professional assessment. "You're the tracker who found the evidence?" "Yes, ma'am. With help from survivors who kept records and witnesses who were willing to testify." "Well, Mr. Hart, you've kicked over quite the hornet's nest. Half the territorial power structure is implicated in this conspiracy." She looked at Caldwell, now being secured with heavy chains. "Including our former governor." "Former?" Morrison caught the emphasis. "As of 2 hours ago, federal government has assumed direct authority over the territory pending investigation. Territorial legislature has been suspended. Military governance established." Hutchins pulled out a telegraph transcript. "This came through just before we rode out. Official order from Washington, signed by the Secretary of War himself." She read aloud. Thornton Caldwell is hereby arrested on charges of treason, espionage, conspiracy to commit murder, and crimes against the United States during wartime. He is to be held pending military tribunal with full investigative authority. All territorial officers suspected of complicity are to be detained for questioning. Federal authority supersedes all local jurisdiction until investigation concludes. The words made it real in a way the fighting hadn't. This wasn't just Morrison's initiative anymore. This was official federal action at the highest levels. Caldwell's arrest had Washington's full backing. Caldwell heard it too. His face went from calculation to resignation. Whatever hope he'd held for political rescue, for legal maneuvering, for his network's protection, it died with those words. "It's over," Silas said quietly to Morrison. "Actually over. Not quite. Still need tribunal, testimony, sentencing. But yes, the outcome's not in doubt anymore." They rode to the border post in formation, now with full company of cavalry, ensuring no further interference. Caldwell traveled in chains, his pride shattered, but his mind still working. Silas suspected the man was already planning how to minimize damage through testimony, trading information about his network for leniency in sentencing. But that was for tribunals and judges to decide. Silas had done his part. Found evidence, gathered witnesses, stood for truth when it cost something. The rest belonged to legitimate authority. At the border post, Caldwell was taken directly to a secure cell. Guards posted inside and outside. Telegraph sent to Washington confirming custody. Every procedure followed with meticulous care. Colonel Hutchins invited Silas, Morrison, and Potter to her office. "Gentlemen, you've done your country a service. The evidence you've provided is comprehensive. The witnesses you've secured are credible, and the conspiracy you've exposed reaches farther than any of us imagined." "How far?" Potter asked. "Dozens of officials, maybe hundreds of sympathizers. We're looking at years of investigation to untangle it completely. But Caldwell was the keystone. Without him, the whole structure collapses." "Will he testify?" Silas asked. "Oh, he'll testify. He'll trade everything he knows for reduction in sentence. Men like Caldwell always do." Hutchins smiled grimly. "Which means everyone who protected him, everyone who benefited from his conspiracy, everyone who thought they were safe, they're about to learn otherwise." She pulled out 3 documents, officially sealed, commendations from federal command, for extraordinary service in exposing treason and protecting federal interests. "You'll each receive formal recognition once the tribunal concludes." Silas took his copy without much interest. Recognition wasn't why he'd done this. Justice was the only reward that mattered. "There's also this," Hutchins added, handing him a telegraph. "From a Mrs. Emma Brennan in Redemption Gulch. She wanted you to know that she and her grandson are safe, that the town is celebrating Caldwell's arrest, and that your room at the boarding house will be waiting whenever you return." Silas felt something warm in his chest. Home. The word that had eluded him for 15 years suddenly felt possible again. "When can I leave?" he asked. "Tribunal starts in 3 days. We'll need your testimony, full deposition, everything official. After that, you're free to go wherever you choose. Then I'll stay until it's done properly. Won't leave justice half-finished." That night, Silas sat outside his quarters with Dutch at his feet and stars overhead. The dog was finally relaxed, sensing that the danger had truly passed. No more hard riding, no more gunfights, no more desperate races against powerful enemies. Just quiet evening at a federal post, with tomorrow bringing testimony and closure. Potter joined him, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Can't quite believe it's over." "Not over yet, but close enough. What will you do after? Go back to drifting?" Silas considered the question. A week ago, the answer would have been yes, without hesitation. But now, thinking, I might stay in Redemption Gulch. Emma's offered me work. Town could use someone with my skills, and there's a boy there who needs teaching about tracking and honor and following your compass toward true north. Potter smiled. "Found yourself a home then?" "Maybe. Strange how that happens when you stop running and start standing for something. They sat in comfortable silence. Two men who'd risked everything for truth and survived to see justice done. The stars turned overhead, indifferent to human struggles but bearing witness all the same. Tomorrow would bring testimony, formal procedures, official records, but tonight brought peace. The kind earned through sacrifice and validated through courage. Silas touched the compass in his pocket, feeling its familiar weight. He'd followed it truly, stayed on course, reached the destination that mattered. His father would be proud. And those 47 men who died 15 years ago could finally rest, knowing their deaths weren't forgotten, their sacrifice wasn't wasted, their truth had finally been told. That was worth everything it had cost. 3 weeks after Caldwell's arrest, Silas Hart stood in a redemption gulch that felt transformed, not in its buildings or streets, but in its spirit. The town had learned hard lessons about false heroes and the cost of blind trust. But it had also learned about the power of ordinary people standing for truth. The military tribunal had concluded 2 days earlier. Caldwell was found guilty on all charges: treason, espionage, conspiracy, murder. His sentence: life imprisonment at a federal military prison, no possibility of parole. Several of his co-conspirators received similar fates. Dozens more awaited trial as the investigation expanded. Justice, delayed 15 years, had finally arrived. Silas walked Main Street with Dutch at his side, heading toward the boarding house where Emma waited on the porch. She'd aged backward in recent weeks, the burden of Jacob's secret guilt finally lifted. She smiled more freely now, laughed more easily, moved through her days with lightness that had been missing. "Mr. Hart," Timothy called, running from the schoolhouse. The boy had grown taller in just 3 weeks, or perhaps it was confidence that made him seem larger. "Teacher Sarah says I can help her with the younger children's reading lessons. She says I have a gift for explaining things. That's fine news. Your grandfather would be proud. Grandma says you're staying. Is that true? You're not drifting anymore?" Silas glanced at Emma, who watched with knowing eyes from the porch. "I'm staying. Sheriff Masterson offered me permanent position as territorial scout and investigator. Federal backing, legitimate authority, fair pay. Seemed like good work for a man who's tired of wandering." Timothy's whoop of joy made Dutch bark in response, tail wagging at the boy's excitement. "And I'll teach you proper tracking." Silas continued, "Not just following signs, but understanding what you're seeing, reading terrain, weather, human nature. Skills that'll serve you wherever life takes you. Like how Dutch knew something was wrong at the Waterfall." "Exactly like that. Sometimes the best tracking is trusting your instincts about what doesn't fit." Emma invited them to supper that evening, a celebration meal, she called it. Potter was there too, having decided to stay in Silver Ridge, where federal authorities needed his expertise for ongoing investigations. Miles Weatherby arrived just before food was served, looking healthier than Silas had seen him, the weight of guilt finally lifted from shoulders that had carried it too long. Sheriff Masterson came too, bringing his wife and a remarkable admission. "I should have questioned Caldwell sooner," he said quietly to Silas. "Had doubts over the years, but never acted on them. Was too concerned with keeping peace to ask if that peace was built on lies. Wisdom comes from learning, not from never making mistakes," Silas replied. "You chose right when it mattered most. That's what counts." The meal was simple but abundant, Emma's cooking at its finest. Conversation flowed easily, sometimes touching on the recent troubles, but more often focusing on future possibilities. Plans for town improvements now that corrupt officials were gone. Ideas for memorial to the fallen soldiers. Dreams of territorial statehood under honest governance. After eating, Timothy presented Silas with a carefully wrapped package. Inside was a leather journal, new, pristine, with quality binding and blank pages waiting to be filled. "Grandma and I picked it out. Together," Timothy explained. "We thought, since your old journal is full of tracking notes and evidence, you might want a fresh one for your new life here." Silas opened the cover. Inside, Emma had inscribed, "For the next journey, E.B. Thank you, he said, his voice rougher than intended. I'll treasure this. Will you write about what happened? Timothy asked, so people remember the truth? Someday, when enough time has passed that telling it doesn't hurt so much. But yes, I'll write it. Every detail, every person who helped, every lesson learned. History should remember the truth, not comfortable lies. Later, after others had left and Timothy had gone to bed, Silas sat with Emma on the front porch. The evening was peaceful, stars emerging overhead, the kind of night that invited reflection. Jacob would have liked you, Emma said quietly. You finished what he started, gave him the justice he couldn't pursue himself. He gave me the foundation, his letters, his observations, his courage in documenting what he saw, even when he couldn't act on it. Without that, Caldwell might never have been exposed. Do you think we've made the territory safer, or just traded one set of problems for another? Both, probably. But at least now the problems will be faced honestly instead of hidden behind false respectability. Silas stroked Dutch's head. The dog contented his feet. Change is messy, but it's necessary. Emma was quiet for a moment. What made you decide to stay? Really? Found something worth staying for? Purpose, maybe. Or community. Or, he paused, considering honesty. Or maybe I just found people who needed me to stay, and being needed felt better than being free to drift. We do need you. The town, Timothy. Me. Emma's voice softened. Strange how sometimes the most important journeys are the ones where we stop moving and finally arrive somewhere. Silas pulled out his father's compass, checking it by starlight. North remained north, constant and true. But now he understood that true north wasn't just a direction, it was a destination. A place where duty met desire, where skills met purpose, where wandering ended and building began. He'd spent 15 years running from ghosts. Took a loyal dog and a hidden cave, and 47 murdered soldiers to teach him that some ghosts needed confronting, not fleeing. That justice mattered more than peace. That truth, however painful, was worth pursuing. Timothy asked me something yesterday, Emma said. Asked if heroes were real, or if everyone was just pretending. What did you tell him? Told him heroes are real, but they're rarely the people on platforms making speeches. They're the ones who do right things without expecting credit, like his grandfather documenting truth even though he was too afraid to speak it. Like you following Dutch through a waterfall because you trusted your companion's instincts. Like Miles Weatherby keeping that medal even though it reminded him of pain. Real heroes are ordinary people making brave choices. That's wise. I've had time to think about wisdom. Comes with age and loss and learning that comfort isn't the same as peace. Emma stood, gathering dishes. You get some rest. Tomorrow Sheriff Masterson wants your help tracking some rustlers. Real work for real pay, the kind of normal that feels extraordinary after everything we've been through. After she'd gone inside, Silas opened the new journal and wrote on the first page. Started this journal in Redemption Gulch after helping expose a 15-year conspiracy. Learned that drifting is easy, but staying takes courage. That dogs are wiser than most men. That truth buried deep enough will eventually surface if someone's willing to follow it. And that home isn't where you're born, it's where you choose to belong. He closed the journal and looked at Dutch, who gazed back with absolute trust and contentment. We're home, boy. Finally found where we belong. Dutch's tail thumped agreement. Above them, stars wheeled through their ancient patterns. The compass in Silas's pocket pointed north. The town around them slept peacefully, guarded now by truth instead of lies. And in the morning, there would be work to do. Honest work for honest pay. Serving a community that needed his skills and valued his presence. The kind of work that gave life meaning beyond mere survival. Silas Hart had spent 15 years drifting. Now he was anchored, not trapped, but rooted. Growing instead of just existing. It felt right, in a way nothing had felt since before the war. He touched the journal again, already thinking about what stories he'd write in it. Not just tracking notes, but reflections on life. Lessons for Timothy. Memories of people who'd shown courage when it cost them. The kind of record that might help others find their own true north someday. Dutch sighed and stretched, completely at peace. Silas smiled and headed inside, ready for whatever tomorrow brought. The adventures ahead might be smaller than exposing corruption and bringing down governors, but they'd be his adventures, his choices. His life finally lived with purpose and direction. The compass had led him home. Now the real work began, building something worth staying for, becoming someone worth being, living the kind of life his father would recognize as true north, followed faithfully. And that, Silas realized as he climbed the stairs to his room at Emma's boarding house, was the greatest adventure of all, finding where you belong and having courage to stay there. The journey's end that was really just a new beginning.